Okay, the second part of the 446 pack is going to be on the outboard carburetors. The first video I concentrated on the center carburetor. This is for 1970 Roadrunner 446 pack manual trans car, all original. This number on this is the rear carburetor, which has a list number of 4383. The front carburetor would be 4382. Now, as I got into this set sent to me by the customer, we ran into all kinds of problems. People have had their fingers in here, and especially on the outboard carburetors. Now, when you guys are looking for these carburetors at swap meets or on eBay, the first giveaway where somebody has a hodgepodge setup is the outboard carburetor bowls have a different sight plug location. Then this is the center carb bowl. This sight plug is lower than the center, and they do that because they want a lower fuel level in these outboard carburetors. That's the first giveaway you'll find when you see a set of these, and that also pertains to the 427 tri-power Holley setup on the Corvettes. As soon as you see a picture on eBay, look at those sight plug holes. This particular one here, because the end carburetors have no accelerator pump, so what they did is they put a screw in there, put a big epoxy booger on there, and they tried to pass this set off as the real deal. Well, that's not correct. So right out of the gate we had to find and then purchase two new correct end fuel bowls, brand new. They cost about 65 bucks. Got them from Jim at Allstate Carburetors. He's been pretty helpful on a lot of projects I've done. And if you need any services, he's the guy to call. But anyways, let's get back to other problems on these outboard carburetors. Now we're back again. The face has to be flat on here. We're not worried about this area in here or the accelerator pump system because it's not used on the outboard carburetors. The outboard carburetors use a metering block, metering plate system, which this it's got this kind of gasket on here that covers a bunch of stuff. Doesn't have the accelerator port, and it uses a backing plate. It's like a stiffener, and then the metering plate. There's a gasket between here and there, and this all screws down and makes a seal. Now you don't usually run into warpage problems on the plate itself because of how the screw locations are here. It always seems to keep it nice and flat. I don't see these being warped, but the body will warp, and also the base will warp. Now the 6-pack. Okay, the differences between on the end carburetors are they have no accelerator pump system in them. They're vacuum operated by these pods that pull on the lever here. When vacuum is applied, opens up the throttle blades. They do have an idle circuit in them, and the metering plate here, this is their idle system. This is like your main well metering system, which comes up, and there's a small restriction in here. I think it's 37 thousandths or 37 thousandths opening, and that'll pull fuel up from basically what you could call the main metering well and into the idle circuit system. Pretty much the same as the center carburetor. It also will emulsify the fuel through the idle air bleed and main bleed system. You know, this accelerator system is not been machined out, so none of this pertains. There's no vacuum inlet into this chamber from the manifold. The bottom only has the idle port. They're actually, what they would be using here is the on the other carburetor port would be the transition slot port, but they use it as their idle restriction because it only comes into one port here, and also dual functions as a transition slot here. As it starts to open, it'll continue to pull fuel because your idle circuit is down here. When you rebuild these outboard carburetors, you have to remove the idle air fuel mixture screws, because the cork gasket after all those years has deteriorated and crumbled up, and most of it is falling around the needle and is blocking that port down there for the adjustment. There's a little lead plug here. The way I remove them is I drill a small hole and I kind of angle it a little after I drill the hole, so my punch will slide in there and knock the plug out. But that all has to be removed clean, and new cork gaskets put in there and the screws put in. What I found on these carburetors on the 70s, they were set at 3/4 of a turn past being seated. You seat them, back them out 3/4 of a turn. That seems what the factory had on them. When I shipped these to the customer, I told them we'll leave those plugs out. If you thought you would have to make an adjustment on them, you can adjust them, and then, you know, replace the little plugs, because we didn't damage them taking them out. Okay, the metering plate, you know, we went over. You know, main metering system is this, you know, this well in here, and it picks up its fuel through a fixed orifice at the bottom of the metering plate. These are the main metering jets. Now, what you're going to run into when people have had fingers in the pie on these carburetors, these particular outboard carburetors, the rear one it's got an engineering number here of 34R6153B. That's the engineering number of the plate, which makes the plate configuration the same. But this plate was used on a lot of different applications. What designates their correct plate for this carburetor is the number 35 stamped on it. The 35 designates what size the main holes are and what size the idle feed holes are. And when we received this carburetor, it had incorrect plates on it, and trying to find these plates was pretty hard, because the rear carburetor plate is a number 35. The front carburetor metering plate is a number 34. Now the difference is, and that's why these carburetors have a different list number. If they were jetted exactly the same, they would not supply different list numbers. The list number is dictating all the orifice bleed hole sizes, metering for that carburetor. And this rear plate, this number 35 plate, is what's called staggered jetting, which means this hole is a different size than this hole. You can almost see the difference. You know, I'm probably going to see it on the video. But the way it works out, because I got the engineering specs from Holley, which is like pulling teeth, this 35 plate has an 093 on the passenger side orifice hole and an 086 orifice hole on the driver's side. No, I got that backwards. I don't get any misinformation here. The 093 is on the driver's side, is faced like that, and the 086 is the passenger side. I just reversed myself. I get confused easy. And the idle orifice hole is 0.037, 37 thousandths of an inch. This was important to the engineers when they did all their dyno testing and running and all that stuff. You know, this it's the attention to detail that makes a difference. Apparently they had some kind of runner port differences, feeding, whatever, that they needed to enlarge one metering side of the carb to the other. But normally you can tell if somebody's been drilling on these, because they'll run a drill bit up through here and they'll scar the inside of the plate. That's what led me on the path to begin with. Not only did it have the wrong numbers, but the original plates I looked at had a drill scratch where they ran a drill through and it hit the back of the plate. That's the first sign somebody's been working on these plates. It's important that these carburetors on a stock engine setup are jetted correctly for it to perform right. The front carburetor used a number 34 plate, but it was not staggered jetted. It had a 089 on both of the main wells, and it still maintained the 0.037 on the idle circuit hole here. So these plates are hard to find, if you can find them. If somebody's drilled them out already, you can put a bushing. There, model shops sell tubing that'll kind of fit like a 93 hole really tight, and then you could model shops and stuff sell like tubing and even your little brass plugs you can drive in, get the proper outside hole and re-drill them to the correct metering. But that's the metering setup between the front and the rear carburetor. We went over the base plate. Now, as we get to the body, you can see the port here. This is the vacuum port that feeds here for the pod. That'll when the center carburetor is pulling vacuum through that port I showed you, it'll pull vacuum through this orifice on the side, which in turn pulls up on the diaphragm, which opens the outboard carburetors. Now, I don't see anybody going over this part of it, but this also has an upper ported vacuum, just like the center carburetor. It's way up high, and what some guys have referred to that as a kill bleed system, to bleed the vacuum off, and that's not correct. That is an additional port. The center carburetor is opening the outboards, but it's a lot of work for it to control two carburetors. So when these throttle blades open up, it'll create another vacuum source to assist that diaphragm to stay open, and help it along. As soon as that center carburetor closes, the linkage actually pulls the throttle blades closed. Because if it didn't do that, it just depended on that vacuum from the center carburetor falling off, these would still stay wide open because they're pulling vacuum from that port. So the linkage is what closes them. You lose the vacuum, the blades close. It's the same setup on here. Make sure this is flat. This is all filed flat. This is a ported vacuum port that goes nowhere because this carburetor doesn't use it. Like I say, the fuel bowl, it uses like a phenolic or whatever they call this material. It's a different type of float, but like I say, it has a lower fuel setting, and you can tell that right away. Like I say, it's got the lower plug on it, And like I say, it won't have no machine work for an accelerator pump system. Vacuum pods, when you're looking at these on eBay and buying them, a lot of times these ears are broke on them. People, they could drop them. It's a pretty big item sticking off the side, so you always want to replace the diaphragms. These diaphragms are old. You don't want to trust them, and they're kind of expensive, but it is what it is. These springs and that sit on top of the diaphragm, and the diaphragm has to overcome. It's kind of a dampener, allows the secondaries to open up, gradually. These particular carburetors use a yellow spring. They're color coded, and it's the short style. Any other carbs, you'd have to do your research if you got 69s or 71, and you could find out all this information if you want to sit there with Holley on hold for an hour. They're pretty good with emails. Takes them 2 or 3 days to get back to you, but other than that, but you want to replace these springs, even if it's the correct color. And I remember this spring has been sitting in that pod for 30 years or so. It's lost its tension. You want to replace that spring. Spring diaphragm. Used the good Holley kits, but I was saying, how you can get into a very expensive setup here because of these mismatched parts that were on this carburetor. The customer probably spent, I gotta say, probably $400 in additional hard parts to get these carburetors correct, and not counting all the time it took to research and find these parts and stuff. So it's kind of like a buyer beware. I hope this video helps you guys out buying this stuff. There's a lot of, like I say, people misrepresenting. There was so much misinformation on the internet about these tri-powers, the jetting, metering plates, and that's the reason I did the video, was just to clarify. And just remember, this is a 1970 6-pack. It's they had a California version for this, and they were different carburetor numbers. Of course, it was jetted different. If you put these carburetors together, everything seals up. They're jetted according to how the factory set them up. This setup will run perfect. You won't be scratching your head, and buying this and buying that. Like I say, the big problems with these were warpage issues. Pulling fuel and stuff in spaces it shouldn't have been. But I'm going to end that. You guys, if I missed anything, you got any questions, just shoot me an email or post it. We'll post it on there if you got something to add that I missed, because we just want to let everybody be successful on rebuilding this stuff.